Lovely. Right, well, hello everyone. Welcome to this evening's event. My name is Claire Coveney. I'm the head of membership here at the Inn. And on behalf of myself and Lincoln's Inn, I'd like to thank you for attending this very important and topical event, both in person and online. Before I hand over to the brilliant chair for this evening, I'm just going to run through a bit of housekeeping. So if the fire alarm goes off, please make your way to the nearest exits, either by the way you came in, or there's an exit just down here. Once outside, please make your way to the War Memorial, which I think is that way, or just follow the lead of a staff member here. This is a no smoking building. There is smoking areas outside and somewhere you can dispose of your cigarettes responsibly. Mobile phones, please do not use during the event and make sure that they are on silent throughout. As you can probably tell, we are recording this evening's event and we will be adding it to the Lincoln's Inn YouTube channel should you wish to view it again or share with others. So timings tonight, starting just a few minutes late, but hopefully we'll hear the panel speak until around 6:45, 6:50. We do have a lot to get through, so we may go over a little bit, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience and on Zoom. And then afterwards at about 7:15, 7:20, hopefully, there'll be a drinks reception sort of next door to here in rooms 3 to 5. So with regards to the Q&A, we'll be, like I say, taking questions at the end of the talk. For those of us joining remotely, please add your questions to the Q&A function rather than the chat, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you in the room, we will have a roaming mic, so if you could put your hands up and we'll get the mic to you. Please speak directly into it so that people who have joined us online can hear clearly. Right, I'm going to now introduce you to our chair this evening, Her Honour Judge Barbara Mensah. Judge Mensah became the first circuit judge of African origin in England and Wales when she was appointed to the South Eastern Circuit in 2005, sitting at Luton Crown Court. She also sits on the Mental Health Tribunal, hearing cases mainly involving restricted patients, and is a member of the Parole Board. Prior to, you're not enjoying this, are you? Prior to her appointment as a circuit judge, she had sat as an immigration judge, hearing appeals against Home Office immigration and asylum decisions, and had responsibility for training of the first-tier immigration judiciary. She was called to the bar by Lincoln's Inn in 1984 and is now a bencher of the Inn. So thank you so much for giving up your time this evening and to chair our forum. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much for that introduction. And can I also thank Karen Schumann, just as she walks in, who is the chair of the EDI committee of Lincoln's Inn, for inviting me to chair what promises to be a very informative session of reflection, exploration of issues, and hopefully positive suggestions for progress from an extremely well-placed and very high-powered panel of speakers. We have Lady Justice Carr, who is also Vice Chair of the Judicial Appointments Commission, Gary Pryce, who's sitting at the other end of the table, an experienced practitioner in New Square Chambers, also on the Bar Council Race Working Group, Rachel Krys, who is the Equality and Diversity Lead at the Bar Council, and Dr. Douglas Board, a career change and leadership coach, who also sits as a lay member on the QC selection panel, but who's not here on behalf of the QC selection panel. He's speaking from his own personal experience. So no private conversations, please, about how your applications are going, how to put in your applications. In a moment, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Then the session will take 3 parts. First of all, I'd like us to consider intersectionality, what it is, how it impacts on career progression. Then secondly, what is being done. And finally, what you can do about progressing yourselves. Then we'll take questions. There are a large number of people also appearing or attending remotely. Claire is watching out for them. Any of them wishing to ask questions can do so on the Q&A section of the Teams. It is a Q&A section, isn't it?
It is a Q&A section,
Right.
yeah.
I wasn't sure this chat. Q&A session, and we'll pick those up afterwards. So first of all, introductions, and I'm going to ask Lady Justice Carr to introduce herself first.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sue Carr. As Barbara has mentioned, I am Vice Chair of the Judicial Appointments Commission. It's a position I've held since August 2020. A few months before then, I was lucky enough to be appointed to the Court of Appeal, and that's where I'm working now. I'm afraid I'm a bench of the Inner Temple, but I've still been allowed through the doors here. I'm hoping to get a drink off you at the end. I'm really looking forward to this evening. I'm going to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what the Judicial Appointments Commission is doing, but what I really am also interested in discovering is what more you think we could be doing and how you think we could improve. So I'm looking forward to getting as much out of this evening as I hope you're going to get out of it as well. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. And then next we have Rachel.
Hi, thank you. I'm Rachel Krys. You promoted me a bit. I definitely don't lead on diversity. We've got Sam Mercer, who's been doing that for many years at the Bar Council, but I'm part of the team, particularly looking at how we progress underrepresented groups at the bar and women. We always have the and women because they don't start off underrepresented, they become underrepresented at the bar. Initially funded by the QCA, this project was really looking at the data that we've got and what interventions are going to work for changing the picture of the bar for the 21st century. So that's my interest.
Right, and then I'm going to skip over to Gary.
Hi, good evening, everyone. As we're talking about intersectionality, I should say I'm from Birmingham. I'm also Black British of Eastern Caribbean background. I called in 1997. I practiced at New Square Chambers around the corner, property litigation and related professional liability matters. I'm a member of the Race Working Group, the Bar Council Race Working Group, and an active member of the Chancery Bar Association. I'm also a member of the Black Inclusion Group, and we were commissioned by Chancery Bar, Bar and Tech Bar to write a report on the inclusion and experience of Black practitioners in those practice areas. Our report finished, we closed it and published it in April 2022, and I might be making reference to it later on. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'm going to ask Douglas to tell us a bit about himself, and then also to move seamlessly into telling us what is meant by intersectionality.
Thank you very much. I am really delighted to be here and with those of you online. I think I'm kind of like a supermarket offer. I think the Inn wanted someone who had some non-legal experience. So I think I'm bringing 3 non-legal careers. My first non-legal career was as a fast-stream Treasury civil servant. I was then a headhunter and ended up as deputy chairman of an executive search firm, Saxton Banfile, which did generalist searches, but did some quite pivotal searches in our legal history, including the Judicial Appointments Commission inaugurally and a bunch of other things. And in my third career, I did a late career doctorate in trying to understand what I'd been doing all this time as a headhunter. I did a late career doctorate in how we select for senior roles. And that informs both my work as a coach, where career coaching is one of my specialisms, and my writing. And I'm a visiting professor at the University of Chichester. So it's probably quite enough. I've had the honor to be in the past chair a number of things, including chairing the Refugee Council, which was a particular privilege and education. Seamlessly, I am ordered to just say a couple of minutes on intersectionality. I realize that we are surrounded here and digitally by the world's largest collection of people who love and are very comfortable with polysyllabic words. But intersectionality, I want to just say, is really about both and problems in social identity. So both and, if you are a woman and Black, if you are gay and have a disability. If you like, think of the Venn diagram, intersection, intersectionality. Now, I slightly dislike the word intersectionality. It feels, well, it has a good side and a bad side. The good side is it's a complicated word, and so that can help us remember that we're discussing a complicated phenomenon. No 2 intersections are the same. Suppose we had groups where, let's say in group A, there was an adverse pay gap of 10%, and in group B, there was an adverse pay gap against a reference or dominant group of 30%. And suppose we had an intersectional individual who was part of A and B. The fact is we could say nothing from that data, really, about what is going to show up as the pattern of pay gap that might turn out for that group. It might be low, it might be in the middle, it might be worse than either of those. And so in that sense, and when we look at the data from the judicial appointments, I think there's some quite interesting stuff, for example, on mixed race there. So the complex word does call to mind that it's a complex phenomenon where it behooves us to pay attention to the lived experience and the socioeconomic outcomes for each intersected group differently. But I slightly prefer to call it both and problems, because I think it's kind of like intellectual barbed wire. It makes people feel, can I really talk about this subject unless I've got, you know, a lot of expertise? I'd like to just, if I may, from time to time, say both and problems rather than intersectionality. My own both and is just, I'm 50-50 English and Chinese. And sometimes being 50-50 makes you get the best of both worlds. But sometimes it means you don't actually feel you belong, and you're made to feel that you don't belong to either of the groups that you technically belong to. And that to me is kind of my personal way into the complexities of both and. As seamlessly as I can I pass over?
Yeah. Right. I'm going to ask Rachel now to tell us about statistics and data.
Yeah, so I was asked to share the data. So I can go on for ages, so please do just tell me to shut up at the point where I've driven you all to sleep. But we've got a lot of data, and you might have noticed that the Bar Council and the BSB have been publishing a lot of data in the last couple of years, particularly on outcomes and different outcomes for different groups. And it's something that we hadn't been doing before, but the work that we started to do to look at what is really happening when we're getting much better at recruitment. We've been spending a lot of time and money and effort looking at recruitment into the bar and expanding the pool of candidates that are interested in coming to the bar and making sure that our recruitment is fit for purpose. We've done really well, but what we heard, we saw, everyone could look around and see, we weren't doing so well at keeping people at the bar, at ensuring that everyone had a fair chance of building a thriving practice and progressing through the bar to whether it be a judicial appointment or a QC appointment. So we felt we had to have a bit of a laser focus on the data and what does it actually tell us about different groups' experiences. Now, the first thing I would say is that we have some good data and a lot of not very good data. We have really good data on sex. We pretty much know all of the sex data for almost all of the barristers who are currently at the bar and also applicants to pupillage. And we have pretty good data on race. It's not too bad. We have really bad data for the other protected characteristics. So for example, on disability, we've only got a disclosure rate of, we've got 39% of barristers haven't filled in the form to say whether or not they have a disability. And we only have 4% of barristers currently declare that they do have, which we just feel is probably quite low. About 20% of the UK working population have a disability. I know quite a few disabled barristers who have never ticked that box. So we've got some issues to do in how we collect data. I'm going to talk about that a bit later because it's really important. So the top line from what we found out in the last couple of years from really digging down into the data we do have is that what we know is female barristers from ethnic minority backgrounds represent the lowest earning group at the bar. In fact, it's 41% of the earnings of white male barristers. So that's even when comparing barristers in the same practice areas, addressing seniority, year of call, every other kind of regression you can do on the data. We found female barristers and barristers from ethnic minority backgrounds earn less on average than their equivalent white male barristers. So we're kind of, that's the sort of headline. We have tried to look at different practice areas, some with some greater and some lesser success. So where we've really done well is where we were able to do data sharing agreements with other people who really like to collect data, namely the government. And we did a data sharing agreement with the criminal legal aid, for example. And as part of the review, we really looked at how earnings at the criminal bar were impacted by race and sex. So again, doing a multiple regression analysis, controlling for all the variables, type of work, amount of work done, type of experience. What we found out that compared to the average, and we worked out the average is a male junior of 17 years call, being a woman means you'll earn around 12,600 less than that 17-year core man. If you're a black woman, you'll earn £18,700 less a year. So what we were able to see is the intersectional impact of sex and race on average earnings. In fact, what we found when we did the race report, we did more of that across other practice areas. And we found that addressing all the other issues, black men earn less than white men, black and Asian women earn less than black and Asian men, and black women earn the least. I don't say this to put anyone off careers at the bar or to feel it's just knowing this means we can do something about it. And certainly what we found is highlighting this data has really strengthened our hand at the Bar Council to say, right, let's stop discussing whether or not we have a problem and actually start discussing how we fix the problem, which is the point. We did some really interesting analysis with BMIF data. So because all of the barristers have to fill in the BMIF returns every year, they actually came up with 20 years worth of data, and they were tracking both practice area and sex over 20 years. And we were able to find that there were more women practicing at the bar in almost every practice area, and that in almost every practice area, the gap in earnings between men and women had got wider. In fact, the only practice area where it hadn't got wider is the only practice area where women out-earn men, which is family children. There, the men are catching up with the women. So I guess that's kind of good news, possibly. Some of the other ones, really big earnings gap. So for example, 24% of the barristers working in commercial and financial services are women. They take home 12% of the earnings in that sector. Now, none of this data has had the regression analysis done. So it's just very top line, like who gets proportions of the pies, but they do tell a story. And not to be controversial in any way, but it won't surprise anyone in this room that the income for criminal barristers we identified as the only practice area where the income had decreased in real terms for everyone over the last few years. In fact, male criminal barristers have had a 33% decrease in earnings since its peak in 2006. And those barristers who worked full-time on criminal legal aid work saw a 23% drop in pre-tax profit after expenses during the pandemic. So, you know, what's going on. There's loads of data in the race report, particularly around the experiences of Black and ethnic minority barristers at the bar, which just show on every measure that you look at it, not just earnings, but if you look at progression, they're doing less well. Candidates from ethnic minority backgrounds are much less likely to obtain pupillage than white candidates, even when controlling for educational attainment. So if you look at the number of people who applied, their educational attainment, you'll see that Black and ethnic minority candidates are less likely to be awarded pupillage. Black and Asian women at the bar are 4 times more likely to experience bullying and harassment than white men. Black and Asian barristers are underrepresented taking silk. In fact, there are 5 Black and Black British female QCs and 17 Black and Black British male QCs in England and Wales. So again, despite us doing quite a bit better in recruitment, particularly around women, and a tiny bit, but not enough around race, we're not seeing the progression, and that really matters because from my mind, if you don't get the work, if you can't build a sustaining and thriving career, you won't stay because the people who get to the bar are excellent people and they expect a thriving career. Tell me, do I need to stop or do you want some more stats?
I think you've got a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going for more. We don't know a lot about disability because, like I said, we haven't been able to do the big data analysis. But what we do know is only 2% of courthouses in Britain are fully accessible for disabled people, and 84% aren't accessible for people in wheelchairs. That means that both barristers who might be wheelchair users and their clients are going to struggle to get in. Many of the bars around here and all around Temple and the 18th century buildings are quite inaccessible, and they take a sort of huge commitment and investment to modernise. We have seen some chambers, for example, starting to do that. I was just at 7 Bedford Row launched their new entrance with their, which were amazing and brilliant, and they've put a huge amount of time and effort into it and money, and it's great to see others following suit. About 2.5% of self-employed barristers currently identify as gay or lesbian at the bar as a whole. But again, we only have information for about 58% of barristers. So lots of people aren't filling in that form. So that's something we need to do something about. And I would just say, I think a critique of some of this data, particularly with the earnings data, is that earnings don't tell you everything about a barrister's career. And certainly, it's really hard to compare different practice areas, different types of work. Some people are working very flexibly, particularly in self-employed practice. But I do think they're a useful rough proxy for whether or not I'm building a thriving practice or if I'm struggling. And they'll certainly tell us, they seem to be a really good indicator of whether someone's going to stay and whether someone's going to progress. And they're the best ones we've found. And so having a real laser focus on this data and encouraging more people to share their data and then do something with the data is one of the things that I'll be talking about a bit later, but I'm very keen on encouraging.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Gary now to give us some more statistics from the viewpoint of the specialist commercial bar.
Thankfully, it's statistics free because I'm dangerous. But what I'm going to do is talk to you about 3 recent reports from 2021 and 2022, which have looked at the experience of ethnic minority practitioners at the bar, both as the general bar and specifically at commercial chancery and construction and technology work as well. Normally, someone introducing a summary of reports would say, I've read them, so you don't have to. I'm not going to say that. They are absolutely excellent works, and I would commend them to everyone, not just because I was co-author of the 3rd one I'm going to talk about. They're widely available, and I would encourage you all to have a look if you have time. The first report I want to mention was written by the Northern Circuit's Race and Diversity Group, and it's published in June 2021. Winston Hunter QC was the chair of the working group which wrote the report. What they reported was that Black and Asian practitioners experienced discriminatory attitudes based on race in almost every area: access to work, attitudes of other legal practitioners, both at the bar and solicitors, discriminatory experiences in court, specifically racial profiling, and also in formal and informal social settings. So not a happy picture. This was coupled with the view expressed that there was a lack of effective grievance procedures to report and resolve adverse experiences. Typically, the sorts of experiences that are reported are the most serious ones, and the view was expressed that when serious incidents are reported, the procedures weren't adequate to deal with them. The Northern Circuit found that the report found that the Northern Circuit lacked diversity, particularly in commercial, chancery and private client work. Individually, members of chambers and chambers themselves were particularly keen to support diversity and equality initiatives. The consensus was that they needed a degree of leadership and coordination to make their efforts as effective as possible. Overall, for the Northern Circuit, it was accepted that for many years there'd been no significant and sustained collective approach to race and diversity issues. Obviously, commissioning the report and producing what is a comprehensive report is a step change as far as that's concerned. A series of recommendations were made for equality and diversity initiatives by the circuit. And what they concluded in process terms was that it was important for the circuit to take the initiative. One, because practitioners on the circuit looked to the officers of the Northern Circuit to take a lead, to provide the leadership. 2, because if there was a centralizing process of initiatives, it would make it easier for individual members of the circuit and their chambers to link their own initiatives to the central program of events. And 3, it was important for the circuit to take the lead because the circuit programs provided the administrative and financial muscle for some of these activities, which some chambers could not afford to do. So There are 17 substantive recommendations. I'm not going to try and list them now, partly because they overlap. You might not be surprised with some of the other reports I'm about to mention, but it is a comprehensive report, but I would recommend, if you can get access to it, that it is worth looking at if you have time. The second report in time is, as Rachel mentioned, the Bar Council Race Report. Race at the Bar, a snapshot report published in November 2021, led by the co-chairs of the Bar Race Working Group, Barbara Mills QC and Simon Regis. What that report pulled together is qualitative, I'll leave that, and quantitative evidence that barristers from all ethnic minority backgrounds face systematic obstacles to creating and progressing a successful career at the bar. This was found to be particularly the case for Black and Asian women at the bar. The race report focused on the case for action now. There was a consensus among those who contributed and worked on the report that there was more than enough data for there to be a consensus that as to what the current position is, and it was really a time for action, practical recommendations which are implemented and worked on by the bar as a whole. The Bar Race Working Group, working with other stakeholders, has been focused on implementing its 23 substantive recommendations, and they cover questions of access to the profession, retention, progression within the profession, and importantly, the culture of the bar, because in the past, that is an issue which hasn't received enough attention because it is absolutely interlinked with questions of retention and progression, in my view. The overarching recommendations from the race report are threefold. Firstly, stakeholders, so SBAs, the Bar Council, individual chambers, should be target setting for improving diversity and retention and progression of barristers, not just measuring activity, as important as it is to measure how many people visit your outreach section on your website or how many law events you attend. Practical issues, for example, if your chambers has reviewed its recruitment over the past 10 years and can't work out why you haven't got any Black Caribbean practitioners at all in your chambers, a practical and lawful thing to do would be to set a target to say, for example, in the next 4 years, we're looking to at least recruit one practitioner from that ethnic group. Now, the point about targets is it focuses attention and resources. The other important thing about targets is that if one misses the target, that's not necessarily a fail. It's part of the engagement process to see where how your chambers is progressing in addressing equality and diversity issues. Obviously, barristers are by nature competitive people, so I hope they try manfully to actually hit the targets, whatever the targets may be. The second overarching recommendation from the race report was that there must be transparency of a data transparency and monitoring, meaning that the analysis and sharing of data annually on the progression of barristers from ethnic minority backgrounds. The Bar Council in the race report mentioned specifically that the impact of intersectionality should be properly analysed within that approach. As I say, the race report's focusing on Black and Asian practitioners at the bar, but the intersectionality and the other underrepresented groups need to be analysed within that process as well. And the third overarching recommendation is that as regards target setting and data transparency and monitoring, action plans should be devised by the stakeholders involved so that they can implement the work on target setting and data monitoring. The Bar Council Race Working Group set out a table at the end of the race report in November last year, and the Bar Council Race Working Group has been actively working to implement the recommendations that it set out in its report. both for itself and also to provide support and guidance for chambers. So things like target setting. I know there was a workshop in July, middle of last month, and the Bar Council is working to help chambers feel confident about addressing these issues, particularly if they haven't ever done that before. The last report I want to mention is a report which was commissioned by ComBar, Chancery Bar Association, and Tech Bar to look at the experience of barristers of Black Caribbean, Black African, and mixed heritage in specialist commercial practice. I'm one of the co-authors of that report, along with Abdul Janadi from Keating Chambers, Krista Lee from QC from Keating Chambers, Jeremy Richmond QC from Quadrant Chambers, and Bree Stevens Hall from Gatehouse Chambers. The report looked at issues of outreach, recruitment, retention, progression, and culture as they affect Black practitioners in these practice areas. The investigations that were carried out included hearing from experts in equality and diversity as to what they understand about how the bar operates and what they might suggest as by way of improvements. We conducted a survey of all the members of the particular SBAs, and the response rate was particularly high. And we also conducted in-depth roundtable discussions with Black practitioners in these specialist areas. Owing to the small number of practitioners in these specialist areas, I can confidently say we have got a very good sample. And if you have time to look at some of the excerpts of the quotations confidentially set out from those roundtables in Appendix 2 of our report, they're insightful, they're powerful, and can be depressing, but it's worth reading. I commend it to you. As far as the experience of Black practitioners in these specialist practice areas is concerned, our clear findings were that there were feelings of isolation, dislocation, and not belonging. And this ranged from very junior practitioners right up to the most senior QCs who've expressed those feelings in confidential roundtable discussions. The survey demonstrated that there were high levels of adverse race and ethnically related behavior from chambers, from court, from clients, including bullying, direct discrimination, inappropriate banter, and unfair bias. Like the Northern Circuit, we found that individual members of SBAs and some chambers were very keen to become actively involved in improving equality and diversity, specifically in these practice areas. We produced a series of 17 recommendations, which we believe are practical and implementable by the SBAs and member chambers on outreach, recruitment, retention, progression, culture, to redress the lack of Black representation in these particular practice areas. The SBAs, I know, and individual chambers are engaged in work to implement the recommendations contained in the report. It's relatively early days. The report was published at the end of April, but I know, for example, my own chambers, we're looking at the recommendations to see what steps we can take by ourselves before we get firmer guidance from the SBAs. So those are the three reports. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I hope you're not all feeling too depressed. It's all very sobering, but hopefully what we're moving on to next will lift your spirits. It's what is being done by the JAC, the Bar Council, the Specialist Bar, and QC selection. So first of all, I'm going to ask Sue.
Thank you. It's not often I hear the JAC lifting your spirits mentioned in the same breath. The JAC, as you know, was established under the Constitution Reform Act 2005 as a new independent body, and it is tasked under statute to appoint only on merit and those of good character. It's got 15 commissioners, it has a lay majority, and under statute has a lay chair. One of the commissioners alongside myself is the wonderful Bree Stevens Hall, And I can tell you it is actually a great privilege and a pleasure to work with what is a very varied board. I thought that I would divide what's going to be a very short section about what's being done at the JAC into two parts. One, looking at what's going on internally, and then have a quick look at what's going on externally. And I just want to repeat what I said at the outset. The JAC recognises, like everybody else, the urgent need to improve diversity within the judiciary, particularly at senior levels. And we are always there keen to learn and listen for good ideas as to what can be done to improve things. But what do we do internally to do our best to make sure that we are getting the best and most diverse group of candidates through? Diversity is really at the heart of everything we do. So our processes are constantly being reviewed, and they're being reviewed externally. Every stage of each process has now been externally reviewed with assurances that we are in line with best practice. Where there are recommendations for improvements, then we implement those. Some people don't know that every competition is now sifted at the shortlist stage, name blind. So that's an important safeguard. Also, we are fortunate under statute that we can implement something called the equal merit provision. You may know about this, but this means that where there are two or more candidates in a selection exercise who are judged as being of equal merit, then we are allowed to give priority to one or more candidates from underrepresented groups. And this is an approach that we can use when we have underrepresentation on the basis of ethnicity or gender, and we identify those groups by reference to national census data and judicial diversity data from the Judicial Office. And I can tell you that the provision is actually used, and it's used quite a lot and obviously very effectively. Every panel that is involved in a selection exercise has a lay majority and a lay chair. All panel members are trained, and all of our tools are quality assured, and they're quality assured by a discrete specialist group. It's an advisory group, but it's made up from representation, as you probably know, Rachel, the Bar Council, Law Society, academics, Silex, and so on and so forth. You've heard a lot about data already this evening, and I'm not going to say an awful lot more about it, but like everybody else on this panel, I think we understand the importance of data collection. The JAC has done a number of deep dives in collaboration with our fellow stakeholders. We've actually done better than most in one area that hasn't been mentioned so far, I think, and that's socioeconomic, which I think is a really important developing area. We've actually got some pretty good data on that. Last year, many of you will know that we published a deep dive statistical analysis that examined the differences in success rates for target group candidates in various recruitment exercises. And the analysis was actually very interesting. It showed, for example, once other factors were isolated, no differences in success rates for female candidates. Non-legal exercises saw no difference in success rates for ethnic minority candidates. So we've got some really good, interesting information coming out of this, and we are now working together with the Bar Council and the Law Society and other groups to understand better what lies behind the differing success rates seen in legal exercises, using the sorts of qualitative and quantitative methods to better understand candidate profiles and things like that. So there is a lot of internal activity going on. It's perhaps not appropriate for me to say, but I do sometimes feel like saying it, that it's difficult to overstate how excited and thrilled we are when we get the right people through from underrepresented groups. We are willing everybody to get through to perform their best and reach the right level for them. And it is sometimes frustrating, speaking purely on a personal level, when some of the noise out there is so negative about what we do. When looking at it from the inside out, I can only say the thrill, the joy, and the determination to get people through on merit at the right level through a fair, transparent, and objective process is really exciting. And I can assure you the will and the determination internally is there. Looking at it from the outside, what do we do externally? How do we reach out? Well, I'm here we are out on the streets day in, day out at outreach events, trying to explain how we operate, what we're there for, how to encourage people to apply and how to encourage people to succeed. It is a competitive process. It's a rigorous process. It's meant to be competitive. It's meant to be rigorous. There will always be disappointed candidates. Anybody sitting in this room who sits either part-time or full-time, I would guess, has been disappointed at some stage. I'm certainly in that number. One of the main things we do externally is that as of 2019, our chair set up or led the setting up of what's called the Judicial Diversity Forum, where in conjunction with the Lord Chancellor, the Lord Chief Justice, the Bar Council, the Law Society, SILEX, and the Legal Services Board, we come together to resolve issues of common concern, to coordinate our activities, this is all under the heading of diversity, and to support each other in the different ventures and programs that we have. The JAC, along with the Judicial Office, runs something called the Pre-Application Judicial Education Programme that is always oversubscribed, but through that you can get mentoring, you can get guidance, you can get work shadowing. It's a fantastic scheme. I thoroughly recommend it to you. We also have quite recently set up a targeted outreach programme. Now, this programme identifies and works with specific eligible candidates from underrepresented groups and also what we call near-miss candidates. Really, really intensive one-to-one tutoring and mentoring to understand why these people have not got through and how to ensure they have their absolute best chance of getting through next time. It's a very holistic approach, but it is very targeted. And so far, its success rates are really, really encouraging. Finally, so whoever's coming next knows they're nearly on. We do spend an awful lot of time on our online resources. So I know websites can be so dull and navigating around them can be difficult, but there is a wealth of information for you. So there's a new tool up there saying, am I ready? Just go on it, answer the questions that are being posed. You'll find out a lot about yourself and whether or not you are ready to apply for judicial appointment. But there's an awful lot of information, how to fill in the blessed forms, how to prepare for your interview, how to work out whether you're ready, what to apply for, what level to apply for, and what support there is out there. So picking up on Barbara's message, I'd like to say we've got mountains to climb, but there is something positive out there. The will is there, the determination is there. I'm sure we can improve. I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas about that. But we are all working really hard because we all understand how incredibly important it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Rachel,
Thank
Bar
you.
Council doing?
Yeah, so we're doing quite a lot on this. In fact, we've got a real focus on equality and diversity and have done for the last few years, really because we're very committed to supporting creating a profession that's representative of all for all. So that's our kind of mantra. And we're really involved in identifying what are the barriers and assumptions that inhibit progress of people with protected characteristics, of underrepresented groups and those from non-traditional backgrounds into and then within the profession. The team that I work with at the Bar Council is overseen by a committee called the Equality, Diversity and Social Mobility Committee. It sounds really boring, but actually they're a great bunch of people, and we deliver things like, we've got a helpline. The helpline is really useful. It's anyone can ring it. People who are working at the bar, barristers can use it. We speak to clerks, we speak to people working in courts, we speak to practice managers, and we get to find out what's really going on the ground when we speak to people on the helpline. We give non-legal advice on all matters equality and diversity, but we learn a lot. That's one of the reasons that we keep running this helpline. And we deliver a lot of training, so on things like fair recruitment, on how to equality and diversity, and both advanced and also introductions. We've got quite a big training package around inappropriate behaviours, harassment and discrimination, trying to kind of really tackle at a chambers level how to deal with some of those behaviours. And we produce a lot of research and guidance, and we work together with a lot of partners. So as has already been mentioned, with the JAC, but also with SBAs, networks, and set up a lot of working groups. We seem to love working groups, actually. Our focus this year is addressing the income inequalities that have been that we've explored through that I've told you about in the data. Really looking at implementing the Race at the Bar report recommendations and tackling the culture. And particularly, we've looked again at whether or not we're adequately tackling bullying and harassment. Short answer is we're not as an institution, but we really need to. And so it's topical today again, but we really need to deal with that. At a bar level, there's only so much data we can collect, and and the data we can collect is always a bit old news. I'm really conscious of that. It's sort of, this is what happened last year, and it's always very macro. So it's interesting and it shows you patterns and big pictures. But what we really need to know is the micro data. We don't need to know, but if we're going to do anything really practical about it, you all need to know it, and in particular at a chambers level. So we are really interested in, you know, why do these disparities arise and what are the solutions? And they're going to happen much more locally. They're not going to happen necessarily at a bar council level. And so what we really have developed in the last year is some toolkits to support chambers in doing this monitoring at that level. So we've got toolkits on monitoring for different groups. We started off looking at different protected characteristics. So we produced one on monitoring on sex, and then we produced one late last year on monitoring and race. Actually, we're about to totally revamp that. And what we're interested in is how you monitor for where you've got big groups and how you monitor for where you might have small groups. So particularly on some of the protected characteristics where you've currently got quite low representation, how do you really meaningfully look at whether people with those protected characteristics and intersecting protected characteristics are progressing, and what data might look like at that level. And so what we're trying to encourage chambers to do is really use the data that they already have, analyze it differently, and then identify patterns, outliers, anomalies, identify comparator groups, so that they can then have really good conversations internally about, look, we're not doing enough to support people returning after parental leave, or some groups in the first 7 years of practice aren't getting off on the same trajectory as other groups. I mean, we know that is true at a macro level. We also know it's true from talking to chambers, it's happening on a chambers level. There are interventions that we can then support them and intervene with. We might want to know whether, you know, I've seen chambers that are really supporting underrepresented groups build up to doing a silk application, and that sort of intervention has a massive impact on how many women, how many Black and ethnic minority barristers are successful in getting the applications through, because they have that really kind of targeted and bespoke support, which makes a big difference. We've also launched a training product that focuses on supporting clerks and practice managers to do this work, and we've just launched in the last couple of months a bespoke advice and support service. So not only are we now telling chambers what we think they should be doing, we're then going in and doing it for them if they need it, because we're really keen for them to do it. One of the things that came out of the research, all of this research on outcomes, but in particular a listening exercise we did a couple of years ago, where we went around and spoke to about 200 people around the bar. And I say people in the broader sense because I mean like lots of different people, men and women, people at all different levels, people with all sorts of different experiences. We spent some time in clerks' rooms, we spent time with practice managers, and we spent time with barristers, really trying to find out what the solutions that were working were. And one of the things that came out strongly was practice management is absolutely key to building and sustaining a thriving practice. But the crucial thing with practice management is it works most effectively, or it's most important for people who are from underrepresented groups who arrive at the bar without necessarily existing in broad networks already at the bar. So if you want one intervention, I think that will make the biggest difference. It's going to be really investing in practice management for people who don't come with a ready network. So we're developing lots of tools and lots of guidance and chat about getting people to want to do and be part of practice management. I can't tell you how many barristers I've spoken to who've told me they've never had a practice management meeting in their life and they're not going to start now, quote, some people. And also chambers I've spoken to say, oh yeah, well, we know you talk about practice management, but we're like, no one wants to do it, or we haven't got time, or it's too resource heavy. But because we know it has such a significant impact, particularly on the groups that we're targeting for support, there's no excuse for not doing it. We've got a disability group that are particularly looking at access at the moment. So we're building on what 7 Bedford Row did, and we're using the organisation that they worked with called Accessible to really go round and look at how we could increase and improve access at the bar. And sort of, as Sam Mercer always says to me, we're trying to find the low-hanging fruit, the bits where actually not a total redesign of every single building at the bar, but there are some barriers that we could remove quite quickly. It wouldn't take too much. It wouldn't take too much cost or energy, but we should do it. So we're looking at how to do that and build that. And we're working to recruit some chambers to join with us in joining various forums, including the Business Disability Forum, and looking forward to achieving disability confidence, which currently we don't have, but we would like to have. And so all in all, we're using the data we've got to now identify both where the barriers are and then what the fixes are that we can actually do something differently. And then we're absolutely determined to go back and do the analysis again and find out whether any of it had any impact. But I have to say, I'm very optimistic, but this is a 10-year plan. It's not a 2-year plan. Like, it's some of these things just going to take some time to fix.
Right, thank you, Rachel. Douglas, what about QC appointments?
Thank you. I've asked if I can save most of my time and energy for putting some ideas and things for doing more stuff and getting even more progress. So I'm going to keep the bit on the QC panel quite short, but that doesn't mean you can't ask questions about it. We could all probably do with some good news. And I think that for many of us, the last year's QC appointment results showed some sustained progress, really, particularly on women, in a year in which, well, let's get some things clear. So first of all, unlike the Judicial Appointments Commission, we don't fill a number of posts. We select individuals who meet a standard. And the other main issue from a selection point of view that is different from the Judicial Appointments Commission is that whereas for the JAC, you are at least a number of times having to try and pick individuals who don't yet have judicial track records that you could look at in the past. The QC selection panel is entirely about whether you have already demonstrated the standards of excellence in advocacy in your practice. So in that sense, it's entirely backward looking. It makes our process easier in one way, because it means we collect lots and lots of references and look at them from a competency point of view. And that is probably a moment absolutely on behalf of everyone on the panel to say thank you to everyone who completes those references and does so with specificity and detail. Lots of judges, but many other people too. Without that, the whole system wouldn't work. Anyway, this year, if I could just share some stuff with that, it's not that we claim credit for it. We're just a selector against standards. But this year, we actually had a very tough, last year, we had a very tough year. We recommended fewer individuals in general than we have, just literally over 100. And for the first time ever, we recommended women to be appointed silk at a higher rate than they exist within the reference population which they're drawn. So 45% of the smaller group that we recommended this year were women. And it's the first time that that percentage has exceeded what we think is somewhere between 30 and 40% is the right reference proportion. And we hope and think that what's happening, in fact, the relative success rate for women is quite stark. It's 63, if you're a woman and you apply to the QC selection panel, you have, as it was, 63% chance of succeeding, whereas if you're a man, you have a 28% chance of succeeding. Don't shoot me, we're not running biased processes. We think it has an enormous amount to do with the differences between women and men at the points at which how ready they consider themselves to be at the point they come forward. We hope and believe that because this is only the first year, after a very long run of years in which the proportion of women has of course been below the reference percentage, that means that there is a pool of very talented, capable, demonstrating excellence in advocacy, female and male candidates going to come forward in the next few years. So I just wanted to say that. I also wanted to say, not because, again, to take any credit, but because we're talking about intersectionality. So you will wonder both about the race and the female race elements in that. So just in terms of the snapshot, with 101 appointments this year, there were 15 of those were non-white. If we say how many were Black, there were 4 identified as Black, 2 men and 2 women. If we count with Black and not other but not Asian, so not white, not Asian, Black and other, then we have 6. That's not a matter of congratulations. I just wanted, the numbers to be out there. But the first bit certainly gives us encouragement. We have a new chair. We also, like the JAC, have a practically 50-50 lay members and legal members. We also, like the JAC, have a lay chair. And this year we have a new chair, an intersectional chair, Manisha Shah, and that is great news for us. And watch this space. We will be continuing. Our job is to apply a standard, not to manipulate anything to achieve a result. But we're pleased by some of those things that we see.
And then Gary.
Conscious of the time, I'll make this brief. In terms of what's been done, can I first focus on the report that I helped co-author? One of the recommendations we made, recommendation 4 for anyone taking a note, is that we wanted to see the SBAs fund at least 3 annual university scholarships for UK domiciled graduates of Black ethnicity, I'm using shorthand, intending to practice at the bar in our practice areas who would not have otherwise been able to afford to take the course. It's early days for the report, but I'm happy to say that COMBAR have already, in collaboration with Oxford University, created 2 places on the 1-year taught postgraduate BCL course for Black candidates who are interested in practicing in our practice areas who would not have otherwise been able to afford to take the course. That response, the rapidity of that response has been quite invigorating given some of the material we've had to look at. So I'm happy to mention that straight away. I'll also mention that in coordination with the Bar Council and the race report and their more comprehensive and more advanced program of implementation, we overlap in terms of trying to achieve better target setting from individual chambers and the SBAs as a whole to consider that. And we're also seeing increasing data transparency and monitoring, although in my view, there's a structural problem and there's a way to go on that. And I know that the SBAs are considering the other substantive recommendations that we've made. So I should have said finally, but I'm finished there.
Well, in a minute or so, can you tell us what we should be doing, Gary?
Well, okay. One thing I'll stick to one thing on recruitment. The pupillage gateway is great because everybody has to advertise through the pupillage gateway. But what they don't have to do is to recruit through the pupillage gateway. And what happens for chambers who don't recruit through the pupillage gateway is we don't necessarily, and definitely in some cases do not, capture the data as to the outcomes of that recruitment process. The bar, in my view, should know who is being recruited every year, including by reference to their protected characteristics, in my view. What I would say to anyone in chambers at the moment is, if at all possible, speak to your pupillage committee, encourage them, if they've left the gateway, encourage them to go back, because it's the simplest way to capture the data on what is going on with recruitment of pupils. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue.
So 3 points. Embrace the JAC process. Use the resources that are available online, in person, through the various programs I've identified. And then if you are remotely interested in applying, prepare.
Thank you. Rachel.
So I would say, if you work in a chambers, if you, whatever position, ask if you're monitoring earnings and what they're doing around looking at different outcomes for different groups. If you're in a position to actually do that work, please start doing it. And if you need some help, get in touch with us. We're really keen to help at the Bar Council. I want lots of people at every level and in every part of the bar to be taking part in these discussions, to be talking about how do we tackle disparities, how do we make this a 21st century institution and profession that is actually fit for purpose, because we need to create a different bar. I want you all to become evangelists like me for data. The more data we have, the more we can do with it. If we don't know where people are, as Gary said, if we don't know what's going on, we can do very little, especially with a profession full of people who really like facts. And so fill in the forms, get your mates to fill in the forms. Like, please trust that if you share, the more data you share, the more we know, the more we can do things about it. And learn to love practice management. I think there's a huge amount of experience and skill and knowledge that's currently stuck in a clerk's room and really needs to be spread out. And the barristers particularly need to start actively demanding and enjoying their practice management opportunities.
Thank you. Douglas, any words of advice?
So invited to think really as a kind of from a careers point of view, and thinking about non-legal world and thinking about what does that make me wonder. I'm going to put out 3 ideas and an observation. But just before I do that, as the non-lawyer on the panel, and given what's going on, I just want to say as a British citizen, to those of you in the criminal bar and those who are taking action in an attempt to save a justice system for this country, I am really sorry as a citizen that you have to do this. I have the most profound respect for all different branches of your profession, and I wish you personally every success in a very righteous cause. That's to try and get to the sympathy for my idiots, non-lawyers suggestions that I just put to you. Where do suggestions come from? Studying what makes meritocracy really in a complex social phenomenon means I think we have to talk about 3 things interlocking: competence, confidence, and recognition. They go together in a complex social web. It is not the case in any profession or in any skill that individuals just simply march along, adding skills in some sort of mechanical way, and then rising up. Unless competence is supported and nurtures confidence, and is supported and nurtured by recognition of others, that one is growing and blossoming in an activity, then all 3 tend to suffer. Actual observed competence will be lower. The individual's confidence will be lower. When we see in some of these reports, for example, talking about individuals, about saying when individuals who wish to consider themselves putting themselves forward for silk or for the judiciary, we need to go way back into the food chain and start acting to try and raise competence, confidence, and recognition together. So those underlie the suggestions that I'm about to make. And then the 4th word I want to come to is power, and to quote a bit from the report that Gary spoke about. So first of all, the role of silks. It's an enormous privilege to serve as a lay member on the Queen's Council selection panel. And it really has sunk in, I'm in my 4th year now, that this isn't just about a technical standard. This is about leaders of a profession, or at least the advocacy element of the profession. I know that many silks, especially once they've, done the transition for the first 2 or 3 years into the new economy that they are in, which could be very beneficial to them, but in some practice areas is not so beneficial to them, are keen to do things that help others. So I would love to see whether there could be more ways, more organized ways in the profession to enable silks to contribute their mentoring and their wisdom and their example to others in the profession. More specifically, I know that there are in some practices, so for example, in criminal trials at murder and in the commercial bar at some areas, it seems to be expected that if a silk is there and is being paid to do the case, that they will do all of certain types of advocacy. And that makes it quite hard for individuals lower down to get the visibility or get the chance in bite-sized chunks to demonstrate capability, for example, in cross-examining witnesses or in standing up to some of the lovely judges that the JAC always select. Now, of course, some individuals do get those opportunities, but guess what? They are going to be the individuals on the whole who are most closely interlinked with the webs of social connection, that there are. Is there anything that the profession could do, perhaps with judicial blessing or with ethical blessing from the profession, to say that actually, as a silk, as a leader of the profession, there should be cases when, without people looking askance and you being able to be quite robust with your client about what you're doing, you step aside and allow a junior an opportunity, and perhaps in a more structured way, discuss with the junior when you take them on what the best opportunities might be. Or might this be like a voluntary commitment that some silks choose to make? And if they make it, perhaps also open themselves up to saying that actually once a year, they'll sit down for a conversation with a relevant counterparty and say, well, what did you do this year to help bring on and widen the opportunity for that? I think your silks are a fantastic asset, and more silks are coming through who have been selected with diversity as a competence. So let's use them to the very best. Secondly, the patterns of allocation of work, which are well known and suffer from all those discriminatory effects, mean that we're going to have pools of talent in some of these branches of the profession who are really struggling to access the most prestigious or highest quality work. Now, there are different indices of what is prestigious or quality in different types of the law, but let me just take, for example, in criminal, the opportunities to engage at the level of the Court of Appeal or to actually engage on issues of legal principle as opposed to factual complexity. Okay, well, if we have that, while we make every effort to change the culture, can we not create any kind of like intermediate achievement points where, for example, criminal barristers, just to stick with that speciality, could, for example, come forward and take a practical exam administered and developed by the profession, showing their prowess in tackling higher and more complex points of criminal law, because there are bound to be people who have the ability to do that, who are not going to get much chance to exhibit it in the conventional way through just being handed the case. If something like that could be created as a kind of intermediate, optional badge of intermediate excellence, it could do something to raise competence, it could do something to raise confidence, and it would be contributing to recognition. Thirdly, as part of my induction to the QC selection panel, I had the great privilege of being invited by a past panel member, a criminal judge, to go and spend a day at his court observing a trial. What completely shocked me, I had not expected, was that he asked me to spend the day sitting on the bench next to him. That was just, I was just kind of mind blown. And then I was reflecting afterwards on what the experience meant of sitting there, observing in a way what I would have observed from where I'd be expecting to be sitting in the public gallery, but from the bench. And that makes me wonder, would it be possible? Now let's be intersectional. We've heard several times about Black women, for example, getting bottom of the heap on various things. Could we have a pilot where maybe, let's say, could the profession nominate amongst Black women lawyers, for example, to start with for a pilot, opportunities to go and spend the day sitting on the bench of the Court of Appeal as a silent, exactly as I was, as a silent observer, observing what goes on, and then having a host judge, dinner that evening or something like that. It is transformational to actually sit in a place and physically embody that actually maybe you could have a place here. So those are three suggestions. And I just want to close with a reflection on power. In the report that Gary co-authored, and he referred to some passages that are difficult. And I want to just read a few lines from one of the quotations in there about culture change. This is in relation to the commercial and specialist bar. The problem is about equity. E&D initiatives are fine and inoffensive, but you need to question how we arrive at a situation where the commercial bar in London, which is basically a white overprivileged enclave that appears very capable of reproducing itself indefinitely, despite the progress of the commercial world more generally. Sadly, I do not think our interests converge. I am having extraordinary conversations with Black commercial solicitors who see this inequality and are sick and tired of it, and on it goes. It goes on to say we must talk about power structures we do everyone a disservice if we talk about this subject only at the level of sort of nice to do things. So my fourth thing is really just a reflection. I had a conversation on the panel with a commercial bar applicant last year in the round, had a very good conversation on the diversity competency, where we ended up talking about, well, how long is it going to take? How long should the public wait, I said, to see visible change in some parts of the commercial bar? Now, the answer and discussion should remain confidential. But it put me into thinking ahead and trying to imagine, suppose I was a rising talent of whatever ethnicity in the commercial bar, who was thinking that perhaps in 5, 6 or 7 years' time, I might be thinking of putting in for silk. Okay, well, under the diversity competency at the panel, we test you, we want examples of proactivity and understanding. And you will most likely get questions from us about outcomes. What difference has your proactivity and understanding made in the world? And we're quite realistic. So there are some outstanding applicants who within, let's be blunt, very white sets have done personally highly creditable things. There isn't necessarily a huge amount of change at the set level, but that's fine. We are happy to recognize the personal excellence. But guys, in 5 or 7 years' time, this is a changing world. I certainly won't be on the panel. I've no idea how it will be done, but I expect we'll still be asking for outcomes. And I expect we'll be expecting more in the way of outcomes in 5 or 7 years' time, because it seems to me it stands to reason. If we're starting from a low base now and excellent efforts can take us this far, in 5 or 7 years' time, your QC selection panel might be expecting more in the way of outcomes. So if you're thinking about that, then think about the set that you are in. Are you going to have the outcomes to describe to the QC panel in 5 or 7 years' time, outcomes of how your set has changed in some of these areas? If you think you can see that, then great. But if you think this lot don't really seem to be changing, then on a horizon of 5 to 7 years, you might consider that perhaps, I speculate, it might be in your interest to consider moving to a different set. And the minute that those who run these sets thought that some of their most precious white talent might be voting with their feet, I expect we might see an acceleration of change. We've certainly seen some, I know from interviews, from client pressure, that it has been a successful lever in some chambers for individuals to appeal to that.
Can I thank all our panelists for giving us the time and answering all those many questions for us. Thank you very much.
Well done.